Let's be honest, when most of us think of Brazil, our minds immediately jump to gorgeous beaches, carnival, or, world-class football. But the reality? It's so much more complex than that. We're actually looking at a true global behemoth. It's a country that practically acts as its very own continent, hiding this absolutely fascinating dual reality.
Right off the bat, look at this stark contrast. On one hand, Brazil is a massive financial and industrial powerhouse. It's a top 10 global economy, holding the lion's share of wealth in South America. But then check out that Gini index figure of 50.3. If you're not familiar, that metric measures wealth distribution, and a score that high means a huge chunk of the nation's immense wealth is concentrated right at the very top. In fact, roughly 1/5 of its citizens are still living in poverty. So we're looking at a nation defined by this exact paradox.
And that paradox brings us to a really crucial question. Why does understanding Brazil matter so much right now? Well, with over 213 million people, an economy that heavily sways global markets, and environmental policies that quite literally dictate the future of our planet's climate, Brazil isn't just a regional leader, it is a central player in the future of the globe. Honestly, you just can't understand the modern world without understanding Brazil.
So, by the end of this explainer, you're going to clearly grasp how all these distinct puzzle pieces fit together to form the modern Brazilian state. We're going to look way past the stereotypes and really dig into the concrete facts, the historical drivers, and the current realities that make Brazil such an incredibly dynamic nation.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with geography and scale, then move on to people and culture, historical background, economy and politics, and finally wrap up with Brazil's global role.
Okay, part 1, geography and scale. Let's look at this continent-sized nation.
Covering over 8.5 million square kilometers, Brazil is the 5th largest country in the world by area. It takes up almost half of the entire South American landmass. To put that sheer scale into perspective, it has a coastline stretching nearly 7,500 kilometers along the Atlantic Ocean. And its borders? They touch almost every single country on the continent. The only exceptions are Ecuador and Chile. All in all, it borders 10 different nations. Oh, and it's also the only country on Earth that has both the equator and the Tropic of Capricorn running straight through it.
Now, within that massive space, the geography is wildly diverse. It features several totally distinct ecological zones that really dictate the local climate and way of life. It's super easy to assume Brazil is just one giant rainforest, but that's actually not true. While the majestic Amazon basin definitely dominates the north, containing the world's largest river system and tropical forest, central Brazil is covered by the Cerrado. That's a massive, biodiverse savanna that acts as the country's agricultural heartland. Head west, and you hit the Pantanal, one of the world's biggest tropical wetland areas, completely teeming with unique wildlife like jaguars and capybaras. And then down in the south, the climate cools off significantly, giving way to the Pampas Plains and even seasonal frosts. This geographic diversity is literally the bedrock of Brazil's agricultural dominance and its staggering ecological importance.
Moving on to Section 2, People and Culture, a truly diverse tapestry.
So, now that we grasp the immense physical scale, let's zoom in on the people. According to the 2022 census data, we are looking at a highly multicultural society. 43.5% of the population identifies as white, mostly descending from European immigrants. Think Portuguese, Italians, and Germans who arrived over the centuries. 10.2% identifies black, which reflects the profound, heavy historical legacy of the transatlantic slave trade. We also see indigenous communities who have lived on these lands for millennia, and a really notable East Asian population. In fact, Brazil has the largest Japanese diaspora anywhere in the world outside of Japan. But look at the largest single group here, at over 45%, classified as Pardo.
To fully appreciate what those numbers mean, we need to understand the term Pardo. It represents centuries of profound cultural blending. You see, in Brazil, racial categories have historically been a bit more fluid than in many Western nations. Pardo encompasses Brazilians of mixed ancestry. That could be a blend of indigenous and European, European and African, or African and indigenous heritage. It visually represents the deeply intertwined genetic and cultural history of the nation. It's a society where cultures have been constantly converging for over 500 years.
All of this demographic mixing forged a highly unique culture, anchored by the Portuguese language, yet deeply enriched by African rhythms and indigenous traditions. The Portuguese language itself is a defining pillar. Brazil is the only Portuguese-speaking nation in the Americas, which gives it a distinct identity entirely separate from its Spanish-speaking neighbors. Religion also plays a massive role. Brazil hosts the world's largest Catholic population. though Protestantism and Afro-Brazilian religions, like Candomblé, are also highly influential. And of course, those vibrant cultural exports Brazil is so famous for, like the musical styles of samba and the martial art of capoeira, those are direct legacies of African communities. Meanwhile, everyday staples of the Brazilian diet rely heavily on native indigenous ingredients, like cassava.
Let's jump to Section 3, Historical Background. From Colony to Republic.
Let's trace how this incredibly diverse society came to be. Brazil experienced a really complex evolution, from a Portuguese colony heavily reliant on enslaved labor to a unique empire, and eventually into a republic. Following Pedro Álvares Cabral's arrival in 1500, a long colonial period, dominated first by sugarcane and later by gold, was tragically built on the forced labor of millions of enslaved Africans and indigenous peoples. But its path to independence was highly unusual. In 1822, rather than a fragmented, bloody revolution like we saw in much of Latin America, Prince Pedro of the Portuguese royal family simply declared independence and established the Empire of Brazil. It stayed a monarchy for decades and didn't abolish slavery until 1888, making it the last country in the Americas to do so. Then, the very next year, a military coup established a republic. That led to a pretty tumultuous 20th century, bouncing between periods of democracy and a military dictatorship that lasted 21 years. Ultimately, this complex history culminated in the current democratic constitution of 1988.
Which brings us to Section 4, Economy and Politics. Let's look at the modern systems and the challenges they face.
With that history in mind, let's talk about how Brazil operates today. It boasts an incredibly complex economy, functioning not just as an agricultural giant, but also as a primary exporter of vital minerals and sophisticated manufactured goods. Yes, it's a dominant force in feeding the world. It's a primary global exporter of soybeans, coffee, and beef. And beneath the soil, it holds vast mineral wealth, including immense deposits of iron ore and gold. But what truly surprises a lot of people is Brazil's advanced industrial capability. For instance, the Brazilian company Embraer is the third largest manufacturer of civil aircraft in the entire world, sitting just behind Boeing and Airbus. So this isn't just an exporter of raw materials. It is a highly diversified, upper-middle-income, mixed-market economy.
However, we've got to look at the dual reality here impartially. This impressive economic success is frequently challenged by deep-seated inequality, corruption, and recent political polarization that has fiercely tested its democratic institutions. Despite having a massive gross domestic product, the wealth just is not evenly distributed. A high percentage of it is held by a very small elite, and issues like endemic corruption have often stalled economic progress over the decades. On top of that, Brazil's modern political landscape is highly polarized. Recent presidential elections have seen the country deeply divided, leading to intense protests and a profound stress test of those democratic institutions established back in 1988.
Finally, Section 5, Global Role. Let's zoom out and look at Brazil as a rising power.
Despite its domestic challenges, Brazil has firmly established itself as a rising global power and a true diplomatic heavyweight. It champions multilateralism through key roles in massive international organizations. It's far from an isolated nation. As a founding member of the United Nations, the G20, and the BRICS economic bloc, Brazil frequently positions itself as a primary voice for the developing world. Its foreign policy traditionally emphasizes peaceful dispute settlement and non-intervention. It also maintains a highly strategic relationship with the United States as a major non-NATO ally. Simply put, when Brazil speaks on the global stage, the rest of the world listens.
But way beyond just politics, Brazil holds a massive portion of the world's biodiversity, which makes its ecological health absolutely indispensable to our global future. What happens inside Brazil literally affects everyone on Earth. The Amazon rainforest acts as a massive carbon sink, playing a vital role in regulating the global climate. So, environmental degradation, particularly deforestation driven by agricultural expansion, isn't just a domestic issue. It directly accelerates global climate change and biodiversity loss. Brazil's stewardship of this natural heritage is, without exaggeration, absolutely critical to the survival of the planet.
So, if there is one single takeaway you should remember from this explainer, it's that Brazil is not some simple monolith. It's a deeply complex, rapidly modernizing giant. It's a nation of stark contrasts, a place where advanced aerospace manufacturing coexists right alongside deep rural poverty, and where a remarkably diverse, blended culture continues to navigate the heavy legacies of its colonial past. It's a country constantly in motion, shaping its identity entirely on its own terms. As Brazil continues to leverage its vast resources and its incredibly vibrant population, the choices it makes politically, economically, and environmentally are going to ripple across the entire world. So I'll leave you with this. Will Brazil's immense natural wealth and vibrant diversity be enough to overcome its deep historical inequalities and truly shape the future of the global stage? Thanks so much for joining me in unpacking the incredible story of Brazil.